Hello and welcome. Are you looking for opportunities to grow your wealth? This is Wealth Talk. It's Friday, July 17th. I'm John, and with me right now is Simon and Alistair. Also, joining us today is a very special guest, Steve Ankerstar from Texas. Welcome to our show, Steve. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, good morning, gentlemen, and good morning, New Zealand. My pleasure to be on the call today.
Very good. Now, Steve Ankerstar has a fascinating background. He was a U.S. Air Force pilot for over 20 years, where he flew the F-15C Eagle and the F-117 stealth fighter. Then he made a transition. He became a certified financial planner and wealth manager. It's quite an amazing journey, which is what we'll be talking about today. His life, his experiences, and his approach to protecting and growing wealth. Now, for listeners, a disclaimer here. This is just a general discussion about financial planning and investing. This is not personalized advice. All right, Steve, I just want to talk a bit about your career in the U.S. Air Force, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when you were in the Air Force, you were not just flying combat missions. You actually served in a range of executive leadership positions. You were involved in operational command and control. What was that experience like, Steve? And what were some of the challenges you faced along the way?
Well, certainly. That's a great question. And the way the U.S. military is structured, or at least the Air Force, is you spend most of your early career, you spend your first 4 years training or so, getting yourself ready for combat. Then the next two ranks, which are captain and major, are basically out there as an operational fighter pilot. If you get called on to deploy, you're leading missions in combat, that sort of thing. And then as you hit lieutenant colonel and move into more of the executive ranks, then you're either a commander, or you go off to the staff organization, or you get to do both, which I was fortunate enough to be able to do both. But getting into the command and control of air power, which is really, really amazing how everything is done and orchestrated, is pretty impressive. I worked from Qatar, which is in Al Udeid, which is in Qatar, the country of Qatar in the Persian Gulf. And from that area, we do command and control of airplanes throughout the entire Middle East region. And believe it or not, somebody makes a quick text from somewhere in Afghanistan. It comes all the way into the command center thousands of miles away. We can discuss it, get the appropriate approvals if it's going to go kinetic, which means using force, and then send it right back to the warfighter, or the airplanes that are above the warfighter, and be able to help them solve their particular tactical problem at hand. So all that happens almost instantly through an amazing connectivity of the internet to be able to really put basically ordnance on target very quickly.
All right, thank you, Steve. It sounds like you had an amazing career in the Air Force. You picked up some pretty incredible problem-solving skills. You served with fantastic people. And I think you probably experienced a lot of personal growth as well. And then after 20 years, you made the transition to civilian life. You became a certified financial planner, wealth manager. How did that happen?
Well, back in high school, I really wanted to go into investing full time. There was a U.S. TV show that I used to watch called Family Ties that had a young man named Alex P. Keaton. That's kind of what I wanted to do. I was a young man. I liked math. I liked solving problems, and I liked the idea of making a lot of money in my lifetime. So that's what drew me into that. And that was my plan until also in high school I saw a movie called Top Gun. And I walked out of the Top Gun movie, and that changed my life. I said, that's what I want to do. So I just invested as an individual, but I put the whole idea of becoming a professional investor kind of off to the side while I tried my best to get in to see if I could get into a fighter cockpit. And when I did, then I was able to serve my country as a fighter pilot for 20 years. Basically, I didn't fly the whole time. But after that, as soon as I hit the point in which you can retire, which in the U.S. is the 20-year mark, then I hung up my jersey, if you will, stepped away from the airplane, stepped away from the Air Force, and finally got to my second passion, which is helping individuals invest and earn money and prepare themselves for retirement.
Yeah, gone from like Family Ties to Top Gun.
Yes.
And it's all come like full circle, isn't it? It's
Yes.
amazing. And I mean, Steve, it does sound like you're trying to bring your passion for military planning and discipline into finance as well. Do you think that's what most people are lacking right now? They don't have a sense of direction. They don't have a plan. What are your thoughts on this, Steve?
Well, everybody's different. It's a great question because everybody is different. And I talk to individuals that are what I call my do-it-yourselfers, which are actually very financially literate. They are passionate about investing and they self-study. They aren't necessarily formally educated in it. But those folks, when they reach out, they're not really looking to hire me, but they want to talk to me because I'm the expert in the field. So that's why I started the podcast, is so if I have somebody who's actually pretty financially literate, I'll simply say, hey, just check into my podcast. I have it structured as questions that people have asked me. And if you can find your question on there, then you can listen to me for about 15 minutes to 20 minutes or so while I give an answer. But for other folks out there that aren't as financially literate, that have done everything right in their life, they've started with their 401ks, which is our American retirement system through our workplace, and they just kind of get to that point where the rules are overwhelming and they would rather spend their time in their careers or with their families than trying to stay on top of everything. So those are folks I like to help out that are pretty much already successful, but I want to now make sure that we get them everything optimized and making the money that they should be making so they can retire with the same lifestyle that they've always wanted.
Yeah, get everything optimized. I like the way you say it, Steve. I'm just going to pass things over to Simon now. He has some other questions for you as well. Simon?
Yeah. Hi, Steve. It's good to hear of Family Ties. They had that here in the 80s in New Zealand as well. The good old days, Reagan administration as well.
Yes, sir. Those were the good old days.
I've got a few questions for you, Steve. So, COVID-19, I mean, we've seen that hammer the American economy, especially in terms of employment numbers. What are you seeing your clients struggle with the most at the moment, and how are you guiding them through this tough time?
Well, certainly, and I will start by saying congratulations to New Zealand. At least everything that I see in the press is as you guys are leading the charge of doing everything right as far as handling/mitigating COVID-19 and getting back to normality, if you will. So you're to be congratulated for that. And the U.S. has certainly gone through its challenges, as we even continue to do so now. And we'll look back in history and see, if we could have done it better or if that's just how it was supposed to be. But when I relate it to individuals, I do have several small business owners that when COVID-19 came out and they were forced to shut down, that was not something they really had in their contingency plan. And when faced with that, they immediately went from a thriving business owner where life was good to now all of a sudden they're on kind of the other end of the economic spectrum where they're actually looking to the government for help to survive and pay their employees and take care of everyone until we get through the situation. So that's kind of one handle, is helping people that never thought they would be applying for government assistance, is to get through that cycle and be able to get the money that they need to get back to work. For the other employee type folks, ones that are working for somebody else, it kind of depends. There's obviously, like you've seen, some businesses thrive in this environment, from the work from home environment. There's certainly a lot of technological advances, so if you work in a tech firm, you may have actually benefited your situation. But there's certainly others, like restaurant workers, just as one example, where through no fault of their own, now they're on unemployment and trying to get by. So as I relate it to their personal situations to the stock market and investing, for most of those folks, it's a go to safety. At the beginning of March was really when the market started to go down. And I use a roller coaster analogy, that the time to get off the coaster is right at the beginning, that first kind of 5 to 8% move down. So if you see it coming and people are like, oh wow, this is really bad, that's when you need to move to cash or move into treasuries or make a decision. And then everything else, when you get the big roller coaster down move where it went down 35% for the U.S. market in basically a month, you're kind of have to hold through at that point, and you don't know what type of recovery it will be, but you certainly want to hold. And then, of course, if you have the opportunity to buy while the market's low, then you would want to put cash to work at that point, which is a very tough thing to do when people are having their world turned upside down by COVID-19.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, this economic pain is real. People are losing their jobs, and as you mentioned, you're working with business owners who are now facing the struggle of their lives. But the strange thing, Steve, now is the stock market, at least after March 23rd, is proving to be pretty resilient. Why do you think this is happening, and what do you see for the road ahead?
Yes, sir. I think that surprised a lot of people. I went through a series of videos. This is before I started my podcast, and actually I'd called March 22nd when I put out a presentation called Lock and Load, meaning that we had gone down far enough to where it was time to start to put money to work. That was a day early, and that wasn't the point, was that I knew it was getting down to the time where the market would turn back around. So your question is, what do I attribute that to? Well, the government and the headlines kind of tend to assume the worst. So when they think of the restaurant worker, they think that the restaurant worker, the restaurant closes, the worker goes home, applies for unemployment. They added to the unemployment benefits folks could get during this time. But what they didn't factor in, or what they're not considering, is that individual now has a full 16-hour day at their disposal to try to do something else to make money, whether that's add value to a current firm by becoming an employee somewhere else, to companies that are hiring, like Amazon is an example, or starting their own businesses, creating value from nothing as an entrepreneur. So folks that are with all of the unemployment, folks just aren't sitting at home. They're not feeling sorry for themselves. There are going to be some of those that do, but for the most part, they're saying, okay, let's accept the facts as it is, and this may change our life forever, we don't know. And what can I do to take care of myself and my family, and really reinvent themselves into something else? So when that happens on a large scale, a lot of companies come out of this with a brand new motivated workforce going off to do fantastic things. So that's that pivot from the old normal to the new normal, if you will, was really what made the stock market kind of rip back higher. And of course that was led largely by tech, which helps enable that work from home environment that everybody talks about.
Yeah, okay. There's good points there. I just want to pivot a little bit again. So I was sitting at a trading desk in 2016, and there was only really one guy in our team who correctly predicted that Donald Trump would be elected. And I kind of remembered him from watching The Apprentice, and I wasn't sure how that would go. But look, he introduced some sweeping corporate tax cuts, and that was really great for the market. It pretty well took off, led by the US from that point on. So what we're worried about now, Steve, is that a new administration could reverse these tax cuts at the worst possible time and delay the recovery. Do you have any crystal ball for November?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have strong thoughts on the issue. And starting with 2016, I was 100% wrong, as pretty much everybody else. I didn't even know the one guy in my circle of experts that was predicting that Donald Trump was actually going to win. So I remember being very busy the next day, taking the portfolios that I managed that I'd taken to safety while we're facing a potential Democratic victory there, and now turning them back risk on in anticipation of the tax cuts that were coming. So how do I relate that to this November is we're kind of in the same boat, faced with either a second-term Trump presidency, which brings its own concerns with it, or a Democratic victory, which is already being talked about in the news as candidate Biden being the front runner. And it is all about the tax changes. I mean, there's a million little issues, but really from an economic perspective and a market perspective is what is the tax package going to look like from the new administration. So if elected, it's going to be a concerning time, and there'll be uncertainty in the markets, which usually leads to them dropping. while we await that tax package. And I think that your concern about it being at the wrong time is going to possibly hamper the Democrats, if they get elected, especially if they sweep the entire government, of what they can do to raise taxes. They might not be able to do it because of the current situation we're in. But then I would think we're just kicking the can at that point. When and if we get through the COVID-19 thing for the United States, then they would look to increase taxes again. So certainly some uncertainty going into the market during that time. But a second term for President Trump, who's a very strong-willed leader and has very strong policies in place, and that's not supporting him, just saying that he is a very strong individual. I do believe his second term would lead to a lot of very strong measures, China for instance, that could also kind of hit the stock market as well. So I'm basically talking to folks, telling it's time to move to safety while we go 3.5 months out from the election for either answer until we know more, which is going to be early in 2021.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Steve. It's really going to be an exciting one to watch there.
Well, elections bring out the worst in the U.S. For sure. It's an ugly process. It's very divisive, and of course, we always hope that even when you have polar opposites battling it out, that what's key to democracy is when your side loses and you don't get what you want, that you fall in line, and at least we go forward as a nation in whatever direction we end up going on.
Yeah, keep going with the flow. We've got an election here as well coming up in 2 months' time.
Exciting.
John?
Yes, thank you so much, Steve. I'm just going to pass things over to Alistair now. He does have some other questions for you as well. Alistair?
Steve, this is a question for the millennial generation. We obviously live in a time where it's easier than ever before for younger people to spend money impulsively and get into more debt. In theory, we should actually be saving more and investing more. But how do we achieve this? What kind of strategies should we be using?
Well, I think that each individual is different with their personal relationship with money. And I like to say that by the time you're 16, you've really cemented your lifestyle habits as far as your relationship with money. So in other words, I have two girls, 15 and 12. When I give them money at Christmas or for doing stuff around the house for us or whatever reason, a spender takes that money and they immediately look to put it to work in consumption. And a saver/investor will save the money until they learn how to invest. They're a little young for that, but certainly a saver is more inclined to learn and put their money to work later on. So when you see millennials entering the workforce, I think you still see the broad gamut of those that are spenders. And even if they step out into, I'm from Austin, Texas, where we have a large technology footprint here, high-paying jobs. You can be a 25-year-old making $200,000. And if you're a spender, you're going to find a way to spend that. And if you're a saver, then you're going to do all the right things to save that for a rainy day. So how do you change that is largely through education. And unfortunately, the spenders, I generally meet them when they're in their 40s. And they kind of have to come in and say, hey, I know I'm not doing the right thing, and I have not saved and invested. What do I need to do? And the term I like to use is adulting. It's like, well, you're ready to go through the process of adulting and leave your childhood behind. And get serious about it and actually pick up the whole process of investing, whenever they can. So I tell folks it's never too late. You can't beat yourself up, but certainly we all know that the earlier you get started, the better off you are, even if you're not that particularly good of an investor. It's just really time in the market that counts.
Hey, there's some good insights there. I like your approach. I've got another question for you. So this is a trivia question here.
All right.
Let's just say time travel was possible. Let's say you could go back in time. Let's say you can meet yourself when you are 18 years old. What would you say to the younger Steve Ankerstar? What kind of financial wisdom would you give him?
I would say be aggressive. I'm a very, despite being fighter pilot that's flown in combat and dropped bombs and flown different couple of airplanes, and being a money manager, managing multi-millions of dollars, I am very conservative by nature. If I had it to do all over again, I would have told myself to be more aggressive at a younger age. That's certainly the time to be aggressive. And even if you just started, like I did start in 1986, right before there was a crash in 1987 in the U.S. market, short-lived, but it was certainly enough to get everybody's attention. If I would have seen that, I would have gone heavy into technology as a young person, to where you have high margins, highly addictive processes and software that makes companies make more money. So again, an 18-year-old me or the 18-year-old listener that's out there, slant heavily towards technology. It changes the world over our lifetime, and it'll change the world over your lifetime. And there's lots of money to be made there. And even if you make mistakes along the way, or something doesn't work out, is what I mean by mistake, you have plenty of time to make up for that. So really get aggressive early on, and you'll be very happy later on in life.
There's some good insights there on technology and the way of the future. Thanks for that, Steve.
You bet.
Yeah, appreciate it, Steve. I got like a final question for you, which is, do you miss being in the cockpit? Do you miss being a fighter pilot?
I get that question a lot, actually, and I don't. Some of the most amazing memories that I can't even put into words that I've had, and it's not just the experience itself, but it's the people that get to fly fighter airplanes are pretty different than society at large. So it's really a unique group, and you're not going to meet a fighter pilot's not going to meet another fighter pilot that they don't like. So it's a very quick-witted, hard-charging type of individual that gets out and gets the opportunity to fly those jets and work as a team and do amazing things. The reason I don't really miss it is I view life like a series of chapters. And when I counsel people about their finances, is you do need to, at some point in time, close the book on, close one chapter out and start another one. So, for instance, in my line of work, most pilots, when they hit retirement age, which over here it's 43 to 45 or so, at that point they transition into the airlines and continue flying, or they look for other flying jobs out there. My personal issue with that is there was no flying job that could be as satisfying as the things I've been able to do in my life. So there was just nothing that would compare for me. So I needed to close that chapter entirely and stop traveling the world in my fast jet, and now stay local, build roots in a community, and become a financial expert officially, and start my next dream. So it would be fun to go out, but and I think about it sometimes, but that chapter's closed, and I'm off to the next big thing.
Well, that's a very positive philosophy, Steve, very forward-looking. Thank you so much for your insights and clarity. We really appreciate you sharing your life's journey with us. Fighter pilot, financial planner, wealth manager. You're very passionate about helping people, and it does show. Okay, now, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you and connect with you, Steve, what's the best way for them to do that?
Certainly, and thank you so much for having me on. I love speaking to folks, and hopefully it helps your listeners to sort through their financial concerns that they have. The best way to reach out to me is through my podcast. It's completely free, OTOTnow.com. So those 7 letters, OTOTNOW.com, will take you to my landing page, and from there you can click to find the podcast, and it's called On Time, On Target, and that gets you the free information that whatever I designed it as questions. So if you see a question as you scan through the episode titles that you have, then click on it and you'll at least get my take on it. So instead of a book start to finish, it's more of a pick and choose sort of podcast for you. And then that will lead you, you'll hear me, and then you'll hear some more email and all that stuff in the podcast, but you have to listen to be able to get that information.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. Now, dear listeners, if you are new to Wealth Talk, please subscribe to our platform to get continued access to new podcast episodes. And you can do this by going to our website at wealthmorning.com. And if you have questions, you can ask them today in the comment section below this podcast, and we will answer them. We are accepting questions from all our listeners, but Lifetime Wealth Investor subscribers will always be given priority. This is your chance to tune in, listen, and contribute to an exciting discussion that may make the biggest difference to your wealth. Okay, Steve, thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. You've been really generous with your time, and we had a great experience talking to you. And hopefully we'll catch up again sometime.
You bet. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and you guys enjoy your Friday.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay.
Great to speak with you.
Yeah, we're wrapping up now. Take
All right,
care.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.